The wind beyond the wall was cruel that night. It moved like a warning, like something alive. Jon Snow stood on the edge of Castle Black, staring into the endless white. He had always felt alone here. Even among his brothers of the Night's Watch, he carried something heavy inside him, something that whispered he did not belong anywhere. He was still young then, not Lord Commander, not king in the north, just a bastard trying to prove he mattered. That was the night everything changed. A rider came before dawn, half frozen, barely breathing. He carried news from across the narrow sea. At first, no one cared. The Night's Watch had bigger problems: wildlings, White Walkers, hunger. But the rider spoke a name that made even the oldest men in black pause. A Targaryen girl, he said, with dragons. Jon felt something strange when he heard it. A pull. Like a string tied somewhere deep in his chest. He didn't understand it, and he told no one. Weeks later, when Stannis Baratheon arrived at the wall, he brought more than soldiers and banners. He brought whispers of the same girl. Daenerys Stormborn, the last dragon, the breaker of chains. Stannis wanted allies. He wanted fire. And for reasons even he didn't fully explain, he sent Jon south as an envoy. "You understand honor," Stannis told him, "and she will need someone who speaks truth." Jon didn't feel worthy, but he went. The journey was long and dangerous. Ships rocked across dark waters. Storms nearly swallowed them whole. Jon had never been far from the north. The world felt too wide, too loud. Cities smelled of salt and spice instead of snow and pine. People stared at him like he was something wild. Then he saw them. Dragons. They circled the sky like living shadows, their wings cutting through clouds. The sound they made was not just a roar. It was power. It shook the ground beneath his boots. Men feared them. Soldiers stepped back. But Jon didn't. He walked forward. And that was when he saw her. Daenerys stood in the courtyard of a great stone city, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She was smaller than he imagined, younger. But her eyes held storms, loss, fire, loneliness. She looked at him like she could see straight through his black cloak. "You are no southern lord," she said calmly. Her voice was steady but curious. "I'm not," Jon replied. I'm Jon Snow, from the north." She tilted her head slightly. "The north is far from here. So are you." For a moment the air between them felt tight. Not hostile, just charged. Her dragons moved behind her. One of them, the black one, stepped closer to Jon. Soldiers tensed. Hands reached for swords. Jon didn't move. The dragon's massive head lowered, smoke curling from its nostrils. Its eyes were red, ancient, intelligent. Jon slowly lifted his hand. The world seemed to stop breathing. When his fingers touched warm scales, nothing happened. No fire, no death. Only a quiet rumble from deep in the creature's chest. Daenerys' expression changed. Not fear, not anger, recognition. "Interesting," she whispered. They spoke for hours that first day, about war, about duty, about the things they had lost. Jon told her about the wall and the dead things walking in the snow. She listened, truly listened. No mocking, no disbelief. And for the first time since her brother died, since her husband burned, since she had crossed deserts alone, Daenerys did not feel isolated. Jon didn't look at her like she was a myth. He looked at her like she was human. That night, she stood on her balcony and thought about him. A bastard who carried himself like a king without knowing it. A man who spoke of protecting people instead of ruling them. In another part of the city, Jon stared at the stars. He felt something shifting in his life, like the path he thought was set in stone was suddenly breaking open. They met again the next day, and the next. Their talks grew less formal, less guarded. She told him about chains and slave masters, about learning that mercy and fire were both weapons. Jon told her about growing up unwanted, about wanting to belong somewhere. "You don't seem unwanted," she said softly. He gave a small, sad smile. "You'd be surprised." There was a silence then, not uncomfortable, understanding. If they had met later, maybe pride would have stood between them. Maybe armies and titles would have made them suspicious. But here, before crowns, before betrayals, before the weight of destiny crushed their shoulders, they were simply two young leaders trying to survive a brutal world. And something fragile began to grow. Trust. Far away in Westeros, the Game of Thrones continued. Houses plotted. Armies marched. The Night King moved silently beyond the wall. But here, in a city across the sea, fire and frost had found each other sooner than fate intended. And fate does not like being changed. The days that followed felt different for both of them, though neither said it out loud. Jon had expected suspicion, maybe even hostility. Instead, Daenerys gave him something he was not used to, attention without judgment. She asked questions, not as a queen testing a stranger, but as someone searching for truth. And Jon answered honestly. He told her about the White Walkers in detail now, not just shadows in the snow, but blue eyes in the dark, dead men who did not stay dead. The way the cold itself felt alive when they were near. Most rulers would have laughed. Daenerys did not. "You have seen them with your own eyes?" she asked one evening as they walked along the city walls. "Yes, and you are certain this is not some wildling story meant to frighten children?" Jon stopped walking. "I buried a brother who was killed by one. I burned his body myself when he came back." There was no exaggeration in his voice, just memory. She studied his face carefully. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. He looked like a man who had carried fear alone for too long. "I believe you," she said finally. That simple sentence meant more to him than she realized. The next morning, Daenerys did something unexpected. She summoned her advisors, Ser Jorah, Missandei, Grey Worm. She told them about the threat in the north. They were skeptical. "Your Grace," Jorah said carefully, "the throne in Westeros is your birthright. The politics there are dangerous enough, chasing ghosts beyond a frozen wall." "They are not ghosts," she cut in calmly. "And if what Jon Snow says is true, there will be no throne left to claim." Jon stood quietly while they debated. He wasn't used to being defended, but she defended him. That was the first crack in her destiny. Because in another timeline, she would have focused only on conquest, on ships and armies and revenge. But meeting Jon sooner planted something else in her heart, responsibility beyond power. That afternoon, she did something even more dangerous. She brought Jon to see her dragons alone. They were larger now, their wings stretching wide enough to block the sun. Drogon circled above before landing heavily, the ground trembling beneath his weight. Jon stepped forward again, cautious but unafraid. "You are not frightened," Daenerys observed. "I am," he admitted. "I'm just more frightened of what's coming for us." She looked at him differently then. "Would you ride one?" she asked suddenly. Jon blinked. "Ride one?" she asked suddenly. Jon blinked. "Ride a dragon?" A faint smile touched her lips. "You touched him without burning. That is not something ordinary men can do. I'm fairly certain I'm ordinary." She studied him for a long moment. "No, I don't think you are." Drogon lowered his massive body as if he understood the conversation. The air filled with heat. Jon hesitated only once before reaching for the saddle straps. The first lift into the sky stole the breath from his lungs. The world became small beneath them. The city shrank. The sea turned into silver glass. Wind tore at his cloak as Drogon roared and climbed higher. Jon felt fear, yes, but also something else. Belonging. Below. Daenerys watched with wide eyes. The sight of him on Drogon's back stirred something deep inside her, a question she had never dared to ask. "Who are you, Jon Snow?" When he returned to the ground, shaky but alive, she approached him slowly. "You didn't fall," she said softly. "I noticed. And he did not reject you." Jon met her gaze. "What are you thinking?" She hesitated. In this earlier time, she had not yet hardened completely. The betrayals that would later scar her had not all happened. Her heart was still open enough to hope. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that perhaps you and I are not strangers by accident." Jon frowned slightly. "I don't understand. Neither do I." But somewhere deep in her blood, something ancient stirred. That night, she ordered preparations to sail west, not to conquer immediately, but to see this wall with her own eyes, to see the threat Jon described. Her advisors were stunned. "You would delay your invasion?" Grey Worm asked. "Yes," she answered firmly. "If death is marching for the living, then the throne can wait." Jon stared at her. No one had ever chosen his fight before. The bond between them strengthened in that decision. Not romance yet, not fully, but trust. Shared purpose, the beginning of something dangerous, because love that grows during war is not gentle, it is fierce. Before they left, Daenerys stood alone with Jon on the shore. Ships were being loaded. Dragons circled restlessly above. "Tell me something honestly," she said. "I always do. If your people do not accept me, if they see only a foreign queen with dragons, will you stand beside me?" Jon didn't answer immediately. The North was proud, suspicious. They did not kneel easily, but he thought about the dead marching in silence beyond the wall. He thought about her choosing to help when she could have ignored him. "Yes," he said finally, "I will." That was the moment fate truly shifted, because when they arrived in Westeros together, not as wary allies meeting late in war, but as united leaders already bound by trust, the game would change. And far in the frozen dark, the Night King turned his head slightly, as if he felt it too. The sea journey to Westeros was long, but it did not feel empty. Jon had never spent so much time on open water. The waves moved endlessly like the world itself was breathing. Some nights were calm, silver moonlight dancing across the surface. Other nights, storms rolled in without warning, shaking the ships like toys in a giant's hand. But through it all, the dragons flew above them. Sailors whispered that it was a sign from the gods. Three shadows crossing the sky, guarding the fleet, and every time lightning flashed, their wings lit up like fire against the darkness. Jon stood at the edge of the ship most evenings. The wind felt different now, less foreign. Ahead of them was home, the north, the wall. His brothers, Daenerys, joined him one night as the sky turned deep blue. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said without hesitation. She seemed surprised by his honesty. "Of the dead?" she asked. "Of my people." She leaned her arms against the railing beside him. "You think they will not trust me? They don't trust easily, especially not Targaryens." Her jaw tightened slightly at that. She knew her family's history in Westeros was stained with both glory and madness. "I am not my father," she said. "I know that," Jon replied. "But they don't." There was silence between them. Not cold, but heavy. "I will not burn villages to win them," she said after a moment. "I have done terrible things in war, but I will not rule over ashes." Jon turned to look at her. In her eyes, he saw conviction, but he also saw something fragile, the fear of becoming what the world expected her to be. "They'll see who you are," he said. "Eventually. And if they don't?" He held her gaze steadily. "Then they'll answer to me." The words slipped out before he could weigh them, but once spoken, he did not take them back. Something changed in her expression, not power, not ambition, relief. When Dragonstone finally appeared on the horizon, the air shifted. This was Targaryen land. Black stone towers carved like dragons rising from the sea. Storm clouds gathered above it as if the castle itself pulled them closer. Daenerys stood taller as they approached. This was her birthplace, the land stolen from her family. But she did not step onto it alone. Jon walked beside her. The lords waiting on the beach expected a conqueror. Instead, they saw a queen arriving with a northern commander at her side. Not chained, not kneeling, equal. Whispers spread quickly. Inside the war chamber of Dragonstone, maps covered the table. Westeros lay divided. Lannisters in the capital. The north uncertain, the reach wavering. Daenerys placed her hand on the map, but not over King's Landing. She placed it over the north. "We go here first," she said. Tyrion Lannister, who had recently pledged himself as her hand, raised an eyebrow. "Most would secure the throne before chasing snowstorms. Most have not seen what Jon Snow has seen," she replied. Tyrion studied Jon carefully. You inspire confidence in her. Jon shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the attention. I'm not trying to. That is usually when it's most effective, Tyrion said dryly. Preparations began almost immediately. Ravens were sent to Winterfell announcing their arrival. Word spread faster than wind. The Dragon Queen was coming north. But she was not coming as a conqueror. She was coming with Jon Snow. In Winterfell, Sansa Stark read the message twice. She travels with you? She asked in disbelief when Jon's earlier raven had reached her weeks before. Now the reality was setting in. A Targaryen queen with dragons. The northern lords were uneasy. Memories of Aerys II still haunted older men. Fire and blood were not forgotten easily. When Daenerys and Jon finally arrived at White Harbor and began the journey inland, the skies were gray and heavy with snow. The dragons flew lower now, their shadows stretching across frozen fields. Small folk stopped working to stare. Some knelt in fear. Others ran. Jon watched their reactions carefully. This is what I feared, he muttered. Daenerys kept her chin high, but inside she felt the sting. She had freed slaves across the sea. Here she was seen as a threat. Winterfell's gates opened slowly. Sansa stood in the courtyard strong and guarded. The northern banners snapped in the wind. Soldiers watched every movement. Jon dismounted first. He embraced Sansa briefly, whispering something only she could hear. Her eyes flicked toward Daenerys, cautious. Then Daenerys stepped forward. She did not demand kneeling. She did not speak of birthright. She said clearly and calmly, I am not here to rule you. I am here because your enemy is mine. The courtyard went silent. Jon stepped beside her. She crossed the sea because she believes us, he added, because she believes the dead are coming. The northern lords exchanged uneasy looks. It was not love at first sight between the North and the Dragon Queen. But it was not open hostility either, and that alone was different from the fate that once awaited them. That night, in the great hall of Winterfell, fire crackled loudly in the hearths. Outside, snow fell thicker. Jon and Daenerys stood together before the gathered lords. Maps were unrolled again. Plans were discussed. Dragonglass mining began immediately. Soldiers were trained harder. But beneath the strategy, something else grew. A connection stronger than politics. Later, alone in the crypts beneath Winterfell, Jon walked with her among the stone statues of Stark ancestors. This is where I used to come when I felt lost, he admitted. She ran her fingers lightly across the cold stone of a long-dead king. You don't seem lost now. He looked at her softly. I'm not. Above them, beyond the wall, the Night King gathered his army. But for the first time in history, fire and frost were not divided. They were united early, and that small difference was about to change everything. Winterfell changed after she arrived. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly, like ice beginning to crack beneath pressure. At first, the northern lords kept their distance. They watched Daenerys carefully at every meal, every meeting. They measured her tone, her patience, her temper. They expected arrogance. They expected fire. Instead, they saw restraint. She spent hours listening to their concerns about food shortages, about fortifying villages, about protecting small folk before any talk of thrones. She ordered her Unsullied to help reinforce walls instead of intimidating the people. She even walked through the courtyard without guards more than once, speaking directly to blacksmiths and farmers. It confused them. Sansa observed all of it quietly. She did not trust easily anymore, but she could not deny what she saw. One afternoon, as snow drifted softly over the battlements, Sansa approached Jon privately. You trust her, she said. Yes. Why? Jon paused. He thought of the moment Drogon had allowed him close, the moment she chose the North over conquest, the way she listened instead of commanding. Because she chooses people over power, he said simply. Sansa studied him carefully, and if she ever stops, Jon's jaw tightened slightly. Then I'll remind her who she is. That night, Daenerys could not sleep. The North felt different from the lands she had conquered before. Colder, yes, but also honest. The people did not flatter her. They did not fear her enough to lie. Their suspicion was open, not hidden behind smiles. She walked alone along the inner walls of Winterfell until she noticed someone already there. Jon. He leaned against the stone, staring out into the dark forest beyond the castle. "You don't rest either," she said softly. He glanced at her with a faint smile. Too much to think about. They stood side by side in silence for a while. Snowflakes caught in her silver hair. The wind pulled gently at his cloak. "Tell me something," she said after a moment. "If the war against the dead never existed, what would you want?" Jon frowned slightly. No one had ever asked him that. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life reacting to what's in front of me. Bastard, brother of the watch, commander, king." He shook his head lightly. "I never planned any of it. You never wanted to rule. No. And yet men follow you. That doesn't mean I should lead them." She turned to face him fully now. "You lead because you care if they live." The words hit him harder than she intended. "And you?" he asked quietly. "If there was no throne waiting for you?" For the first time she hesitated. "I wanted to go home," she said softly, "but I don't even know what that means anymore." Jon looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe home isn't a place," he said. "Maybe it's a person." The air shifted between them. They were standing closer now, close enough to feel each other's warmth in the cold night. Neither of them moved away. It was not a rushed thing. Not desperate. It was slow and quiet, like two people who had been lonely for too long, finally recognizing each other. When their hands touched, it felt natural, but fate does not allow peace without a price. The next morning, scouts arrived breathless from the last hearth. The dead had been seen, not rumors, not shadows, an entire village wiped out overnight, bodies gone, no blood left in the snow. The Night King was moving faster than expected. The War Council gathered immediately. Jon spoke with urgency now, pointing to the map. "If they break through the remaining castles along the wall, they'll march straight through the north. We must meet them before their numbers grow too large." Daenerys nodded. "My dragons can thin their ranks." Tyrion looked uneasy and exposed them to the Night King. Jon and Daenerys exchanged a glance. She did not argue for glory. She did not demand risk. Instead, she said, "We fight together, or not at all." The Northern Lords saw it clearly then. This was not a queen dragging them into her war. This was their king and a dragon queen choosing to stand as one. And that unity began to win hearts. Preparations intensified. Dragon glass weapons were forged day and night. Trenches were dug outside Winterfell. Signal fires were prepared across the north. But amid the fear, something else spread too. Hope. Because people saw them together, walking the battlements, training with soldiers, planning side by side. It felt different from stories of mad kings and dragonfire. It felt balanced. One evening, as they prepared to ride north to meet the advancing army, Samwell Tarly arrived in Winterfell with Bran Stark. And with them came truth. Truth about Jon's parentage. Truth that could shatter everything. In a quiet chamber, Bran spoke calmly. "Jon is not Ned Stark's bastard." Daenerys stood very still. "His true name is Aegon Targaryen." The words hung heavy in the air. "He is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, the rightful heir to the Iron Throne." Silence swallowed the room. Jon felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. Daenerys did not speak at first. In another timeline, this revelation would have planted seeds of fear and jealousy. But this time, things were different. Because they had built trust before crowns stood between them. She looked at him not as a rival, but as the man who had stood beside her when she was still just a girl trying to find her place. "You didn't know," she said quietly. Jon shook his head, overwhelmed. "I never wanted any of it." Bran's voice remained calm. "Wanting has never mattered in the Game of Thrones." Daenerys stepped closer to Jon. The throne was suddenly no longer just hers by birthright, but instead of anger, she felt something else. Choice. And this time, she was not alone. Outside, the wind howled louder. The Night King was coming. And now the dragon had met another dragon far sooner than fate intended. Jon couldn't breathe properly after Bran spoke those words. Aegon Targaryen. The name felt heavy, wrong, like armor that didn't fit. I don't want it, he said again, almost like a stubborn child refusing something dangerous. I never have. The room was silent except for the fire crackling in the hearth. Sam looked nervous, Bran calm, Daenerys unreadable. In another life, in another version of this story, that moment would have been the beginning of distance between them. Suspicion, fear, pride. But here, things had grown differently. Daenerys walked toward him slowly. Look at me, she said softly. Jon lifted his eyes. You are still you, she continued. A name does not change the man who rode beyond the wall. It does not change the man who crossed the sea to protect his people. He swallowed hard. It changes what people will expect. Yes, she admitted. And what do you expect? He asked. That was the real question. She could demand silence. She could demand he bend the knee fully and never speak of it again. She could see him as a threat. Instead, she did something no Targaryen ruler had done in generations. She chose trust. I expect you to fight beside me, she said. And when this war is over, we will decide together what comes next. Together. Not I. Not mine. Together. The tension in the room shifted. Sam looked relieved. Bran gave the smallest nod, as if this outcome was one of the few threads that led to survival. But there was no more time to think about crowns. The horns sounded from the outer walls. 3 long blasts. The dead were near. Winterfell exploded into motion. Soldiers rushed to positions. Horses screamed in the cold air. The Unsullied formed disciplined lines. Northern archers climbed the battlements. Above them, the sky darkened unnaturally fast. Jon stepped into the courtyard, pulling on his gloves. Daenerys followed, her silver hair whipping wildly in the wind. Snow began to fall, not gently this time, violently. Then they heard it. Not a roar, not a battle cry, but a sound like thousands of bones dragging across ice. The army of the dead appeared at the edge of the tree line. Endless. Silent. Blue eyes glowing like stars in a dead sky. Even seasoned warriors felt their courage shake. Jon looked at Daenerys. This is what I saw, he said quietly. She nodded once. Then she did something powerful. She reached for his hand briefly, squeezing it, grounding herself, before walking toward Drogon. Dracarys, she whispered as she mounted. Jon climbed onto Rhaegal without hesitation. 2 dragons rose into the storm. The battlefield erupted. Fire poured from the sky, cutting through ranks of whites. The flames lit the darkness in violent orange bursts. For a moment, it looked like hope might actually win easily. But the Night King had been waiting. From the storm clouds above, an icy scream tore through the air. A dragon made of death itself descended. Viserion, blue fire burning in his throat. Daenerys felt the pain of it instantly. Her child, twisted into a weapon, the sky became chaos. Fire against ice, wings colliding, screeches shaking the earth below. On the ground, the Unsullied held formation as the dead crashed into them like a tidal wave. Northern soldiers fought desperately, dragon glass blades shattering bone after bone. Jon steered Rhaegal hard, barely dodging a blast of blue flame. "Stay close!" he shouted across the wind. Daenerys nodded, her face fierce and focused. They fought not as strangers, not as uneasy allies, but as a pair who trusted each other's movements. When Viserion lunged for Drogon, Jon intercepted, slashing with dragonglass spear from Rhaegal's back. It struck deep into the undead dragon's wing. Viserion shrieked, but then the Night King appeared clearly for the first time, standing calmly amidst the chaos below, watching them, waiting. Daenerys saw him and felt a chill deeper than winter. "That's him," Jon shouted. She knew. Drogon dove. Flames engulfed the Night King completely, covering him in a storm of fire. For a heartbeat, it seemed finished. But when the flames cleared, he still stood, unburned. The fear that spread through the living army was sharp and sudden. Jon landed hard near the godswood, sliding off Rhaegal as the dead surged forward again. Daenerys brought Drogon down beside him. "This ends with him," Jon said, breath heavy. "Yes." They moved together toward the center of Winterfell, where the Night King advanced slowly, cutting to defenders without effort. Arya Stark darted through shadows nearby. Bran waited in the godswood, calm as ever. The Night King raised his hand, and the dead that had fallen moments before began rising again. The living screamed in horror. Daenerys looked at Jon. "If we lose here, we won't," he said firmly. For the first time, she saw something blazing in him that matched her own fire. Not ambition, not pride, but refusal to let death win. They charged together. Jon fought through whites with raw determination, Longclaw cutting clean arcs of destruction. Daenerys wielded a dragon glass blade with surprising skill, learned from weeks of training in Winterfell's yard. The Night King turned toward them, blue eyes locking on to violet, ice meeting fire. But this time he faced two dragons, not divided, not suspicious, not fractured by politics, united. As he lifted his icy spear to strike, Arya moved from the shadows. The moment unfolded like destiny correcting itself. Jon distracted, Daenerys attacking from the side, the Night King focused on them, and Arya struck. The dagger plunged into his chest. For a second nothing happened, then cracks of light spread across his frozen body, and he shattered. All across the battlefield, the dead collapsed like puppets with cut strings. Silence fell heavy and sudden. The war ended not with despair, but with unity. Jon looked at Daenerys through smoke and falling snow. She was breathing hard, alive. He stepped toward her slowly. "It's over," she whispered. "Yes." But they both knew something else had just begun. Because now there was no greater enemy left. Only the question of a throne. The silence after the battle felt unreal. Winterfell was still standing, but barely. Fires burned in broken towers. The courtyard was covered in ash and melted snow. Bodies of the fallen lay everywhere. Friends, brothers, soldiers who had believed in something bigger than themselves, but they had won. The dead were gone. And for the first time in months, the air did not feel heavy with fear. Jon stood on the battlements as dawn slowly pushed through the gray sky. The cold wind hit his face, but it no longer carried death with it. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Daenerys. She looked different now. Not broken, not hardened. Victorious. "You were right," she said quietly. "This was the real war." Jon gave a small nod, "And we survived it." She stepped beside him, looking over the north, stretching endlessly into white distance. "If we had fought each other first," she murmured, "we would have lost," he finished. And they both knew it was true, because if she had come later, if pride had stood between them, if jealousy had grown from secrets, the army of the dead might have swallowed everything before unity ever formed. But they had chosen trust early. That changed everything. Later that day, the fallen were burned in a long, solemn ceremony. Flames rose high into the sky, not as destruction, but as farewell. Daenerys stood beside Jon as the North watched. Not behind him, beside him. The Northern lords saw it clearly now. She had fought for them, risked her dragons, risked her she-dragons, risked herself. She had not hidden behind armies. Respect began replacing suspicion. Even Sansa stepped forward publicly. The Dragon Queen stood with the North when it mattered. Sansa announced, "We will not forget it." It was not kneeling, but it was acceptance. That night, the Great Hall of Winterfell was filled with food, music, and exhausted laughter. Survivors needed something to hold on to after so much death. Tyrion drank heavily, telling stories. Arya smirked quietly in corners. Sam sat proudly with Gilly. Jon sat beside Daenerys at the high table. The mood felt lighter than it had in years, but under the warmth of firelight, another question lingered. The throne. Cersei Lannister still ruled in King's Landing. She had refused to send troops north. She had waited, hoping both the living and the dead would destroy each other. Now she would learn they hadn't. Tyrion eventually approached the high table, wine in hand. The realm will hear of this victory quickly, he said. And when it does, Cersei will panic. She has wildfire and desperation, Jon replied. That makes her dangerous. Daenerys' expression darkened slightly at the mention of wildfire. She had heard enough stories of Eris II to know what madness looked like. We march south, she said firmly, but not to burn cities. We end her rule cleanly. Jon studied her carefully. No unnecessary fire. She met his eyes. No ashes. That promise mattered, because now the truth of his heritage hung quietly between them. It had not caused a fracture, but it was still there. Later that evening, after the celebration quieted, Jon and Daenerys walked alone again. Winterfell felt calmer now. The air no longer screamed with danger. You could take the throne, she said suddenly. Jon stopped walking. I don't want it. But you could, she repeated. By birth. By right. I never asked for rights. She faced him fully. And that is exactly why people would follow you. There was no anger in her voice, no jealousy, only honesty. Jon stepped closer. I bent the knee to you before I knew who I was, he said. Not because of dragons, because you listened. Because you chose to save people first. Her eyes softened. And if the realm demands you instead? She asked quietly. Then we give them something they've never had, he replied. And what is that? Two rulers who don't want power for themselves. The idea lingered in the cold air between them. Not king over queen. Not queen over king. Equal. A new kind of rule. In King's Landing, far to the south, Cersei Lannister stood at her balcony overlooking the city. A raven had arrived hours earlier. The Night King was defeated. The dragons lived. And Daenerys Targaryen marched south with the North united behind her. Cersei's jaw tightened. Let them come, she whispered coldly. I will not surrender. Back in Winterfell, Jon and Daenerys stood beneath the stars. You know this will be different from the North, Jon said quietly. The capital is full of fear. Full of rumors about you. I am used to fear, she answered. I don't want you to become it. She looked at him sharply. I won't, she said. And this time, he believed her completely, because she had already proven something important. She had chosen people over pride once. She could do it again. The next morning, banners were raised. The wolf and the dragon rode south together, and for the first time in Westeros history, hope marched with them instead of behind them. The march south felt different from any war campaign Westeros had seen before. There was no desperate fear pushing them forward now, no army of the dead chasing their heels. Instead, there was purpose. The north rode with the unsullied. Dothraki scouts moved like shadows along the hills. Two dragons circled high above, their presence no longer terrifying, but commanding. Villages they passed did not burn. They watched. People whispered as Jon and Daenerys rode side by side. Some called her the Dragon Queen. Others called him the White Wolf. But more and more, they began saying something new. They ended the long night. That mattered. When they reached the Riverlands, several minor houses bent the knee willingly, not out of fear but calculation. They had heard how Cersei had refused to fight the dead. They had heard who had stood instead. The story was spreading faster than ravens could fly. In King's Landing, panic quietly crept through the Red Keep. Cersei Lannister stood before the Iron Throne, her green eyes sharp with frustration. They were supposed to weaken each other, she hissed. The dead were supposed to solve this. Qyburn stood nearby, calm as ever. Your Grace, we still hold the capital. The Golden Company is strong. The Scorpions are mounted along the walls. And the people? She asked coldly. They are afraid. Good, Cersei replied. Fear keeps them obedient. But this time, fear would not work the same way, because outside her walls was not just a foreign queen with dragons. It was a united force led by two rulers who had already faced death itself and survived. When Jon and Daenerys finally stood overlooking King's Landing from a distant ridge, the city looked almost peaceful from afar. Sunlight hit the towers gently. Smoke rose from chimneys. It did not look like a battlefield, but they both knew what waited inside. "She'll use the people as shields," Tyrion warned. "She always does." Daenerys' jaw tightened. "I won't burn them." Jon glanced at her. "We'll give her a choice first." A parley was arranged outside the gates. Cersei arrived dressed in black, crown glittering in the sun. Her expression carried the same cold superiority she had worn her entire life. She looked at Daenerys first. "So," Cersei said smoothly, "the foreign invaders survived her northern adventure." Daenerys did not rise to the insult. "The dead are gone," she said calmly. "You chose not to help. I chose survival," Cersei replied. Jon stepped forward slightly. "You gambled with the world." "And yet the world still stands," Cersei answered sharply. Her eyes shifted to Jon. "And who are you today? Bastard of Winterfell? Or Dragon Prince?" The words were meant to provoke, but Jon remained steady, a man who would prefer not to see this city burn. Cersei laughed softly. "You speak of mercy while standing beside a woman with dragons." Daenerys stepped closer now. "I am offering you a chance," she said clearly. "Surrender. The city will be spared. Your soldiers will live. The people will live." Cersei's face hardened. "You expect me to kneel?" "No," Daenerys replied calmly. "I expect you to choose your people over your pride." That struck deeper than any blade. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Cersei turned without answering. The gates shut. War was coming. But this time, Daenerys did not feel the same rage that once would have consumed her. She did not feel alone. She did not feel betrayed. She had Jon beside her. That steadied her. The next morning, the siege began. Scorpions fired massive bolts toward the dragons, but Jon and Daenerys had learned from past battles. They attacked from high angles, diving fast and striking precisely. Drogon destroyed the outer ballistae one by one. Rhaegal targeted the Golden Company's formations outside the gates, scattering them before they could organize. Below, the northern forces and Unsullied pushed forward carefully, minimizing civilian harm. Cersei watched from the Red Keep balcony, fury growing in her chest. "They're holding back," she muttered. "Why are they holding back?" Because this was not conquest driven by ego. This was controlled, disciplined. When the city gates finally cracked under pressure, Daenerys landed Drogon inside the outer courtyard. Soldiers dropped their weapons almost immediately. The bells began ringing. "Surrender." Jon rode through the broken gates moments later, sword drawn but lowered. The Lannister soldiers knelt. The people watched from windows and rooftops, trembling, but alive. No wildfire exploded. No dragonfire consumed the streets. Daenerys stood in the center of the courtyard, breathing hard, staring at the Red Keep. This was the moment that once would have decided everything. The moment anger could have taken over, but Jon stepped beside her quietly. "It's over," he said gently. She looked at the city, at the terrified faces, at the lives that would be ashes if she chose rage. Then she gave the order. "Secure the Red Keep, no burning." And just like that, history changed. Cersei was captured before she could ignite her hidden wildfire caches. The Iron Throne Room, once a symbol of cruelty and paranoia, stood intact. Hours later, Daenerys and Jon entered it together. The throne stood at the far end, cold and sharp. Daenerys approached slowly. In another life, she might have walked alone. But now, she stopped halfway and looked back at him. "Do you still not want it?" she asked softly. Jon looked at the throne, then at her. "I don't want it alone." Neither did she. Outside, the people of King's Landing realized something shocking. They were still alive. The Dragon Queen had not burned them. And for the first time in generations, the throne had been taken without madness. Daenerys reached for Jon's hand, and together they walked toward the future, not as rivals, but as equals. The throne room was quieter than anyone expected. No screaming, no wildfire, no dragon fire melting stone, just silence. The Iron Throne stood in front of them, cold, twisted, made of swords that once belonged to enemies. It had always looked powerful from a distance. Up close, it looked uncomfortable. Dangerous. Daenerys walked slowly toward it, her boots echoing across the stone floor. Jon followed, not behind her, not ahead, beside her. This moment had shaped her entire life. Every loss, every exile, every fire she had walked through. And yet, standing there now, it did not feel the way she imagined. "It's smaller than I thought," she whispered. Jon gave a faint smile. "It's still ugly." She almost laughed. That small laugh mattered more than any crown. Outside, the city was calm. The Unsullied kept order without cruelty. Northern soldiers helped clear debris instead of looting homes. Food stores were opened for the people. No one had expected mercy, and that was exactly why it changed everything. Tyrion entered the throne room quietly. He looked at the two of them, and then at the throne. "Well," he said softly, "history waits." Daenerys turned to Jon. "If I sit there alone," she said carefully, "the realm will whisper about your claim forever." "I don't care about whispers." "I do," she replied, "because whispers become knives." She stepped closer to him. "We can break the wheel," she said, "but not by repeating it." Jon studied her face. There was no madness in her eyes, no hunger for absolute power, just determination. "What are you saying?" he asked quietly. "I'm saying the Seven Kingdoms have always been ruled by fear or inheritance." She looked at the throne again. "What if we ruled by choice?" Tyrion's eyes widened slightly. "Choice?" Daenerys nodded slowly. "The lords of Westeros will gather. They will see what we did in the north, what we did here, and they will decide if they accept us together." Jon frowned. "You would risk that?" "Yes." That was the final proof. She was not her father. She was not here to burn a kingdom into obedience. Weeks later, the great lords and ladies of Westeros gathered in King's Landing. Stark, Arryn, Tully, Greyjoy. Even new leaders from houses broken by war. They expected tension. Instead, they saw something unusual. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, standing openly beside Daenerys Stormborn. No secret rivalry, no hidden resentment. The story of the Long Night had spread across the realm. The story of mercy in King's Landing had spread across the realm. The story of mercy in King's Landing had spread even faster. Tyrion addressed the council first, explaining the victory over the dead, the restraint shown during the siege, the choice to avoid burning the capital. Then Daenerys stepped forward. "I was born believing the throne was mine," she said clearly. "But birth alone does not make a ruler just." Murmurs filled the hall. She continued, "We defeated death together. We spared this city together. And we stand before you not to demand loyalty, but to earn it." Then Jon spoke. "I never wanted a crown," he admitted. "But I will not run from duty either." He looked around the hall. "If you believe we can protect this realm not as conquerors, but as guardians, then choose us." It was the first time in Westeros history that rulers asked to be chosen. The decision was not immediate. Lords argued, debated, weighed pride and politics. But one truth kept rising above the noise. They had already proven themselves in fire and ice. One by one, the great houses bent the knee, not out of fear, but belief. And so something new was born. Not a queen above a king, not a king above a queen, but two rulers bound by shared power. The North remained proud, with Sansa ruling it as Lady of Winterfell under a united realm. The Iron Islands gained measured independence under strict alliance. The small council was rebuilt with voices from multiple kingdoms, not just one family's allies. The Unsullied were given land if they wished it. Some stayed. Some sailed away free men at last. The dragons nested peacefully outside the city, symbols not of terror, but protection. Months later, as spring slowly replaced winter, Jon and Daenerys stood together on the balcony overlooking King's Landing. The city was alive, Markets busy, children playing in streets that had not turned to ash. You changed the story, Jon said quietly. She shook her head gently. We did. He looked at her, remembering the first time he saw her across the sea, a young queen trying not to be alone. If we had met later, he began, we would have destroyed each other, she finished softly. Timing. That had been the true enemy all along. She reached for his hand. No more lone wolves, she said. No more lonely dragons, he replied. Below them the bells of the city rang, not in surrender, but in celebration. And for the first time in generations, the Iron Throne was no longer a symbol of madness or blood. It was simply a seat, and the people beneath it were no longer afraid. Fire had met frost sooner, and instead of melting into destruction, they had forged something stronger,